Thank you for coming to our September session of Convivium. My name is Jim Ginther. I am the interim director for the Center for Medieval Studies, and it's my privilege to moderate today's session and also introduce the speaker. Dr. Fagin Davis received her PhD in Medieval Studies from Yale University in 1983. She has been best known for the work she's done in manuscript paleography, but also codicology, and has been a cataloger at Yale University, the University of Pennsylvania, the Walters Art Museum, Wellesley College, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Boston Public Library, and several private collections. She has a number of publications, but I think one that I think is really important for those who teach paleography is its catalog of medieval and Renaissance manuscripts in the Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library of the Yale University. And she's also worked on antiphonies. I came across her work when I was trying to develop a software application called Broken Books, a way of kind of bringing back disparate leaves from various books that have been cut up. And Lisa had been working on this for a very long time. And it's the Bayeux and the Beauvais missile, yeah, that she's been working on and slowly reconstructing over her entire career. But she's also best known for the work she's done on the Voynich Manuscript, and she has published extensively on that. Also have been made a number of public appearances, including, I think, something on the History Channel too, right? Which sometimes attracts some interesting individuals on a regular basis who can tell her that they've solved the whole mystery. But today she's going to give us a talk on the materiality of the Voynich Manuscript. Lisa, thank you so much for saying yes, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim, for that very kind introduction and for the invitation and for graciously hosting our little delegation from the Medieval Academy. We so look forward to being here every decade on the 7th. It's a long-standing tradition, and it's always a pleasure to be back at the University of Toronto. So thank you very, very much. And thank you, too, for those of you joining us online. I see in the attendee list a lot of friends and colleagues, so thank you all for signing on. All right, here we go. Images of the Voynich manuscript are constantly being downloaded and shared and posted all over the planet. Blogs, forums, social media posts, and documentaries, including several on the History Channel, devoted to its history and secrets are manifold. After centuries of study and hundreds of proposed solutions, about 70 of which I received just this year, they're all sitting in my inbox, it is easy to forget that the Voynich manuscript is, in fact, an actual object. It is, in fact, a real thing that exists in space and time. And so in order to fully understand this fascinating codex, we must therefore also engage with the manuscript's material evidence. Over the last few decades, many Voynich researchers, we call ourselves Voynichologists, that is the official term, among them Renee Zandbergen, Nick Pelling, Vladimir Dulov, myself, and others, have recorded observations about the material aspects of the manuscript. Today, I want to add some observations of my own and pull those material aspects that can be placed in a relative timeline into a coherent narrative that tells the material history of the Voynich manuscript. At the conclusion of my lecture, I will introduce some intriguing and exciting new results of computational and codicological work that I've been undertaking in collaboration with a computer scientist, Colin Layfield, for nearly a year. These results have important implications for anyone who is attempting to study, read, decipher, decode, or otherwise analyze the manuscript. So let's start with a brief introduction to this most mysterious of manuscripts. The Voynich manuscript is more formally known as Yale University Voynich Rare Book and Manuscript Library, MS 408. It is a scrappy little creature, worn and fragile. The manuscript is foliated to 116, but 14 leaves are known to be missing, leaving us with 102, sorry, that's my hair is causing a problem here, 102 extant leaves measuring only 225 by 160. The first and longest section is a collection of dozens of drawings of plants, one per page, that appears to be analogous to a typical medieval or humanistic herbal. As in an early modern herbal, the text here likely identifies the sample, explains how to sow and care for it, how and when to harvest it, and what to do with its various components. Each Voynich plant is drawn in great detail with roots, stem, leaves, and flowers. Some look tantalizingly familiar. Anyone who just laughed is busted. Oh, that's a good point. Some most definitely do not. Much of the online discourse about the manuscript focuses on attempts to identify these plants, although many, like the one on the right here, are so fantastical that they defy classification. The next section is a series of 14 circular diagrams sprinkled with stars, suns, and moons. These, perhaps, cosmological diagrams are written on fold-out sheets. Here, for example, is the bifolium comprising folios 67 and 68, 5 panels bound such that 2 panels are on the left of the gutter, indicated in blue here, and 3 are on the right. As with the plants, there are some components of these diagrams that seem almost recognizable. Here's a cluster of 7 stars. Pleiades, perhaps? Following the cosmological section is a series of 12 circular diagrams bordered by nude Rubenesque ladies emerging from baskets or tubes with a zodiac symbol in the center. These are also drawn on fold-out sheets. The series intentionally begins with Pisces. Capricorn and Aquarius are missing because the last leaf of this section has been removed, and Aries and Taurus are each recorded twice. There's a good reason for that. I don't really have time to get into it, but we can discuss it in the Q&A or afterwards if anyone really needs to know. Given the format of these diagrams as compared to contemporary analogs, they're more likely astrological than calendrical, perhaps having something to do with prognostication, although that is a speculative interpretation. The next section is truly bizarre and essentially without precedent. 10 pages of those naked ladies standing or swimming in green or blue pools with diagrams that may depict the female reproductive system, among other biological processes. This may have something to do with medicinal bathing, or that is balneology, or perhaps women's health and gynecology. The next section is also without analog, an enormous fold-out, 3 times the size of the manuscript when open. 9 connected circular components with micrographic writing in decorative spirals and arrays. After this are several leaves of plant components, vessels, and text, perhaps recipes of some kind. And the last section is comprised of 12 leaves of nothing but text, with paragraphs set off by marginal stars. The manuscript ends with the originally blank folio 116 verso, 116v. The somewhat Germanic inscription at the top of this page is roughly contemporary with the manuscript, although I suspect it is a slightly later addition. It appears to be a charm of some kind, but as with most things Voynich, interpretations vary. The writing system has also been the subject of centuries worth of research, debate, and discovery. The set of glyphs used to write the manuscript comprises around 25 to 30 common symbols, depending on how you define distinct glyphs, with ligated and complex combinations as well. The format of the text on the page indicates that the text is to be read from left to right and top to bottom. 25 to 30 symbols is the Goldilocks zone for a set functioning as an alphabet. If there were 10 symbols, it would be far too few to be an alphabet, and 300 would be far too many for anything but a pictographic or syllabic writing system. The system has rules that may be orthographic or grammatical. Here are just a few examples. This combination that looks like a 4 and an O appears almost exclusively at the beginning of clusters of symbols, which I'm going to call words for simplicity's sake, although we do not know for sure that that's what they are. The combination that looks like an 8 followed by a 9 only appears at the end of a word. And so rather than constantly write statements like the combination that looks like 8, 9, Voynichologists have come up with an arbitrary ASCII substitution alphabet in which 8, 9, for example, is transcribed as DY. So here are some examples of how the system works. And 4O is transcribed as QO. This allows researchers to transcribe the manuscript in a machine-readable way. There are other transcription alphabets that have been developed over the years, but I tend to use this one. It's called the extensible Voynich alphabet. Once the manuscript had been transcribed in this way, researchers could start performing analytics on the text, spotting patterns that may be important clues. You can analyze things like metrics like letter frequency. So here's the letter frequency graph for English, ETA, OIN, SH, and so on. And here's what it looks like in Voynichese. So you can see that the frequency graph looks a lot like what you would expect from an alphabetic language, with some symbols used up to 10 times more frequently than others. Analysis of the most common words reveals that Voynichese seems to follow a linguistic rule known as Zipf's law. So this is Zipf's law for English. Zipf's law states that in a natural human language, the most common word occurs twice as often as the second most common, 3 times as often as the third most common, and so on. Voynichese follows that pattern. But sometimes Voynichese is quite anomalous when compared to other languages. Yale linguist Claire Bowen and her colleague Luke Lindman recently demonstrated that Voynichese has an extremely low word level entropy, which means that the orthography is very, very predictable as compared to other languages. This apparent contradiction has yet to be resolved, and the jury is still out on whether the text represents an actual human language or a code or a cipher or nonsense. We just don't know for sure yet. So what can material testing tell us about the manuscript? Carbon-14 dating back in 2009 concluded that the animals, the calves, whose skin became the manuscript's parchment were slaughtered around 1420, give or take a few decades. That's helpful, but it doesn't prove that the manuscript was written at that time. There's no evidence of palimpsesting, but could blank parchment sit around for a while before someone wrote on it? It's possible, but there are limits. There are those who believe that the manuscript is a modern forgery, created as a scam by Wilfrid Voynich, the early 20th century New York book dealer who acquired the manuscript in Rome in 1912 and for whom the codex is now named. After all, forgers like the Spanish forger cleverly used authentic medieval parchment to help them get away with their early 20th century forgeries. Later material testing of the inks and pigments that he used proved that the Spanish forger's work was in fact modern. After all, why would a forger working during a time when such tests did not exist bother to use authentic recipes when modern inks and pigments would give them the visual authenticity, which was all they really needed? Material tests on the ink and pigments of the Voynich manuscript, conducted also in 2009, found none of the signatures of an early 20th century forger. The green pigment, for example, does not have the characteristic arsenic spike of the 19th century Paris green pigment used by the Spanish forger. So while you cannot definitively prove that any manuscript is truly authentic, you can prove that it isn't. And these test results do not meet that threshold. Another set of tests was performed at Yale recently using X-ray fluorescence analysis to investigate the elemental components of the ink and pigments on folio 1. Because X-rays penetrate the entire thickness of the parchment, we actually get results for the verso as well. So here they are under regular visible light. So on the verso, you can see there are green and yellow leaves in addition to brown ink, text, and drawings. The first thing to notice here is that the green leaves from the verso are clearly visible with the naked eye on the recto, because the green pigment has leached deep into the parchment, which is typical. There are yellow leaves on the verso, but we don't see them on the recto because the yellow pigment doesn't bleed through the way that the green does. These XRF results, which have not been seen publicly until right now, can be visualized as false color elemental distribution maps. So here is the copper signature, clearly showing the copper component of the green pigment, which is exactly what you would expect from a medieval verdigris or malachite-based pigment. Given the expense of malachite pigment and the muted shade of the green we actually see here, verdigris is more likely, especially since that pigment is known to leach into parchment. The iron map, which is my favorite, look how cool that is, shows us the yellow leaves, but not the green. We can also clearly see the text, which is iron gall ink, including the text from the verso. The iron signature of the yellow leaves suggests that the yellow is likely a common earth pigment, an ochre, since ochre has a high iron oxide component. Although the analysis of the XRF results is ongoing, there is nothing here that is immediately suspicious or wildly unexpected. There's nothing in any of the material testing and imaging that suggests that the manuscript is anything other than what it is purported to be, an authentic 15th century object written with typical iron gall ink and painted with common mineral and earth pigments on calfskin. So that's the first step in our material history. The manuscript was almost certainly written in the early 1400s. Multispectral imagery is another forensic methodology that has been helpful in understanding the material history of the manuscript. In 2014, while working on a different imaging project at the Beinecke Library, the imaging team from the Lazarus Project at the Rochester Institute of Technology was granted permission by the library to take multispectral images of 10 selected pages of the Voynich Manuscript. And you can learn more about all of the images that they took on my blog. You can just flash the QR code if you're interested. These images are indeed revelatory. Back in the 1910s, when Voynich suspected that an inscription and other annotations had been scraped away from the bottom of the very first page. So this is the picture that Voynich himself took. It's in the files at the Beinecke Library. And he thought he could see something in that area. So sometime in the 1910s, probably around 1919 or so, we don't really know, he added a chemical reagent to try and read the effaced text, permanently staining the manuscript in the process. Again, this is very, very typical for the early 20th century. UV exposure allows us to clearly read the inscription, naming Jacobus Tanapius, an early 17th century natural philosopher associated with the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, the manuscript's home in the first half of the 1600s. In addition, my own analysis of multispectral imaging on the first page identified what is likely an early attempt at deciphering the manuscript, written by Johannes Marcus Marci, a Prague alchemist who owned the manuscript in the 1660s. Returning to the XRF results, we can see that the reagent stain really pops in the sulfur map, as well as in the potassium, likely identifying the reagent as something called liver of sulfur, a common compound of sulfates and potassium sulfides used in the early 20th century, specifically for this purpose. The permanent staining in the lower and outer margins of folio 1 was an unfortunate side effect. The compound seems to have been applied twice, first more broadly and presumably ineffectively, leading Voynich to try again in a smaller area with a more sulfur-intensive reagent. As for the Marci annotations, they do not register at all on the iron heat map. Marci was not using iron gall ink. Instead, the letters appear most clearly on the zinc map, suggesting that this is a zinc gall as opposed to an iron-based ink, which is in fact consistent with my dating of this hand to Markey in the 17th century. It was Markey who sent the manuscript to Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar in Rome, as a gift in 1665, which tells us that Markey's annotations were obviously added before that date. So now we can add Tanapius, Markey, and Voynich's interventions to our material history. So we have a vague sense of the when, but how about the where? Unfortunately, the identified material elements, iron gall ink, standard pigments applied to calfskin, are so common and ordinary that they do not help us zero in on a point of origin. But there's some evidence in the illustrations to consider. In the top right corner of the large fold-out known as the rose, there is a fortified structure with very distinctive architectural elements. There it is. These crenellations are of a type known as swallowtail or Ghibelline merlins. A Voynich researcher named Koen Guyens, who I believe is online, hi Koen, has created this very detailed map showing where pre-1450 swallowtail merlins can be found. So that's extremely helpful. They do appear primarily in northern Italy, but also Sicily and Malta and along other places along the northern coast of the Mediterranean. If we return to the zodiac symbols, we can observe that they are all clearly from the European zodiac iconographic tradition. In addition, several of the figures in this section are clothed in distinctively European attire. So we can at least tentatively conclude that the manuscript was likely written in a European context. It is also worth noting that early in its life, the manuscript was annotated with the month names in some kind of Romance language, perhaps a French dialect or maybe Catalan. So that may also tell us something about the manuscript's early travels. Now, besides analyzing the language, the illustrations, and the material elements of the manuscript, we can productively apply the methods of paleographical analysis to the script and scribes of the Voynich manuscript. Now, I am not a linguist, I am not a cryptologist, but I am a paleographer and a codicologist. So let's see how paleography and codicology can help us push forward with the seemingly intractable challenge that is the Voynich manuscript. The discipline of paleography, the study of ancient handwriting, essentially involves three skill sets: literacy, learning to read different hands; attribution, learning how to determine a dated place of origin of a particular hand; and description, that is, using particular features to distinguish one hand from another. As far as the Voynich is concerned, we can just take that first one right off the map, because of course, no one can read it yet. As for number two, attribution depends on comparing one hand with a hand of a known date and place. We obviously can't do that with the Voynich because there are no other examples that have ever been found of this script. The best we can do is try to contextualize the glyph set by comparing the letter forms to other manuscripts. This manuscript at the Huntington Library in California is a good example, as many of the Voynich symbols are somewhat analogous to letter forms in the codex. Although the early 15th century Italian humanistic origin of the Huntington manuscript is consistent with the carbon-14 dating of the Voynich manuscript's parchment, such correlations are suggestive but not determinative. The humanistic tendencies of the glyph set, the color palette, the style of the illustrations, I don't have time to get into that today, suggest an origin in the early 15th century and a stylistic zone that includes the Italian peninsula, the area around the Adriatic, and stretching northwards into Germany and parts of Eastern Europe, but that too is a subjective analysis. It does, however, correlate quite nicely with Koen's Swallowtail Merlin map. So we can add a zone of possible origin to our timeline. So what of number three, description? Due to its unique nature, the Voynich manuscript presents an interesting paleographical problem from a theoretical as well as a practical perspective. Back in the 1970s, a Voynich researcher named Prescott Currier discerned two primary hands at work in the first, the botanical section of the manuscript. Scribe 1 on the right, scribe 2 on the left. He noted as well that the two scribes used Voynichese in slightly different ways. One of that he called language A and language B, although linguists will tell you that they're not really different enough to be called different languages, hence my putting them in quotes. Since no professional paleographer had attempted a comprehensive analysis of the script and scribes of the manuscript, I decided to give it a try a few years ago. By carefully considering specific graphic features of particular symbols, I eventually identified 5 different hands in the manuscript. You can read more about my Voynich paleography research in this 2020 article in Manuscript Studies. This work has important implications for the research I'm going to present towards the end of this lecture. Now let's talk about codicology. Examining a manuscript structure is critically important for understanding its origins and history, and that includes examining the binding. Currently, the Voynich manuscript is bound in 19th century lymph vellum. We are fortunate in that one of the Beinecke's conservators, Paula Zayatz, intentionally left the front hinge detached after conducting some routine cleaning and upkeep in 2008, allowing us to see the spine of the book where the structure and binding history are in evidence. The first thing we need to record here is, of course, the current binding, 19th century lymph vellum covers with fragmentary paper spine liners. In the 19th century, the manuscript belonged to the community of Jesuits in Rome, where it had been since Athanasius Kircher received it as a gift in 1665. And this binding is consistent with the style they used throughout their library. But we also have evidence of the original binding. 3 stations sewn on double cords with remnants of head and tail bands. That's a standard structure of a 15th century European style binding between leather-covered wooden boards. The use of wooden boards also explains the insect damage on the first and the last few leaves. And finally, there is ample evidence of 20th century interventions, the most impactful of which were done in 1967 by conservator Helmut Lehmann-Haupt, a consultant who worked for New York dealer Hans P. Krauss, who owned the manuscript at the time. It was Krauss, by the way, who gave the manuscript to Yale in 1968. The structure of the manuscript can also be discerned by internal evidence, such as the visible sewing in the center of each choir and choir numbers on the last verso of each gathering. So let's add those to the list. The manuscript was foliated in the 17th century when it was in Prague. Tabs like this one indicate that several leaves are now missing, and skipped foliation tells us they were removed after the folio numbers were added. And here, in fact, we can see that the folio numbers were not damaged by this very large water stain in the upper margin of the first 50 or so leaves, which means that the stain happened before the foliation was added. In addition, as I'll demonstrate in a few minutes, this particular water stain can be shown to have occurred before the manuscript was bound. So that's 2 additional pieces of evidence for our materiality timeline. Another piece of evidence that impacts the timeline is the inscription on the top of folio 17 recto, which was severely damaged by the water stain and is written in the same hand as the inscription at the top of 116 verso. These inscriptions then were written before the manuscript was stained. The next investigative step is to create a collation statement, an alphanumeric formula that summarizes the choir structure. The various illustrative sections map quite neatly onto this structure. And the same is true for scribal output. We can even map language A and language B onto this summary, noting that only scribe 1 uses language A, and the other scribes all use language B. Something else to notice is that quire numbers 16 and 18 are lacking, along with their respective folio numbers. So that's another piece of material evidence to add to our timeline. The next thing we can do is get a little more granular by mapping the work of each scribe onto individual pages, leaves, and bifolia. When we do this, we find something really bizarre. Now, if you are a person who does codicology, you will immediately see that this is really, really weird. I see Sean nodding. This is really, really strange. Scribal work in the manuscript varies by bifolia, not by page, not by text, not by quire. This utterly atypical pattern recurs throughout the herbal section and immediately suggests that the bifolia are misbound. This contention, which is generally accepted by Voynich researchers, is supported by additional material evidence. The water stains in the upper margin, so here, for example, on 32 verso and 33 recto, should be nearly symmetrical reflections of one another, but they aren't. The shape is quite different from one page to the next. In addition, as others have noted, there's evidence on several bifolia indicating that they are misbound, such as the way that the streams on folio 78 verso and its conjoint, the leaf it attaches to, folio 81 recto, cross the gutter, suggesting that these two pages were once consecutive as well as conjoint. Because offsets elsewhere in the manuscript indicate that it has been in its current state for centuries, and there is evidence of only one binding before the present covers, we can conclude that the initial binding was itself the misbinding. This may be one reason why the Voynich manuscript has been so difficult to crack. How can you read a book whose pages are out of order? For me as a codicologist, the logical next question is, the Voynich manuscript is misbound. How can we put it right? Challenge accepted. I am currently tackling this problem from two different directions in collaboration with scientists in multiple disciplines. Now, a question I am often asked, and I'm sure someone in the audience is thinking it, what about artificial intelligence? Can't AI solve the Voynich manuscript? It cannot. Almost certainly not. AI can only work with the data it has access to. And there is nothing for the Voynich manuscript for AI to work with. Not to mention that AI has no way of filtering responsible online Voynich discourse from nonsense. And there is a lot of nonsense out there. However, AI is really good at pattern recognition and managing extremely large data sets. In collaboration with a team of AI pattern recognition specialists at the University of Groningen and my colleague Colin Layfield at the University of Malta, we're working on training a neural network to compare the shapes of the water stains in the upper margin of the first 50 leaves, calculating similarity scores between each possible pair and using that data to hypothesize the original sequence of bifolia, since the stain predates the misordering. More than half of the extant pages are botanical, preserving drawings of 126 plants on 33 bifolia. 126, excuse me. The number of possible permutations of those bifolia has 37 digits. It is an extremely large number. Way too many possibilities for a human to calculate, much less analyze, hence the neural network. So we've got some preliminary results that suggest that while the method is worthwhile, it still needs some refinement. Using something called a saliency map, we can visualize which pixels of a particular image are of most use to the network in calculating the similarity scores. So here are the stains we're interested in. Keep an eye on that little box. Here come the saliency maps. The network could not have been less interested in the stains. It was drawn to the boundaries of the page and very distracted by the green pigment. So the next step is going to be to remove those distractions through processing and cropping so that the network pays attention to the pixels that the humans are interested in. This work is ongoing, so stay tuned. I'm involved in another collaboration that has paid off with what appear to be extremely important results that you are hearing today for the very first time. So buckle up. It's called latent semantic analysis. My friend and colleague, Colin Layfield, hi Colin, from the Department of Computer Science at the University of Malta, has worked with me for nearly a year to apply this methodology to the Voynich Manuscript. And I am today reporting our results publicly for the first time, although we hope to publish these and other results in detail soon. I also want to thank Yale linguist Claire Bowen for reviewing our work and helping us to refine the methodology. LSA is a computational technique that uses transcendental functions such as logarithms and cosines and math, complex equations to analyze a page of text, looking at features such as spelling or word context, identifying contextual patterns and pairs of potentially related words. LSA is language agnostic, meaning it doesn't care about the explicit meaning or semantic content of the text, hence the latent part of the title. This makes it a perfect methodology to apply to the Voynich because we can analyze an individual page without having to know what it actually means. Each page ends up with a graphable vector. Here, for example, are the vectors for folio 108 verso and 111 recto. Their similarity is measured by calculating the angle between the vectors, resulting in a cosine that represents a similarity score between -1 and 1. The smaller the angle, the greater the cosine and similarity. In this case, the angle of 43 degrees results in a cosine and similarity score of 0.72, which is very, very high. In our experience, anything greater than about 0.40 turns out to be a pretty good marker for common content or even potential adjacency. Colin, I apologize for the oversimplification of your absolutely beautiful mathematics. Once Colin wrote the code and conducted some standard pre-processing of the machine-readable transcription, and we will explain all of those details in our article, we tested the method on 2 Latin manuscripts, the Aberdeen Bestiary and a copy of Vincent of Beauvais' Speculum Humanae Salvationis. We chose these manuscripts because their texts have been transcribed in machine-readable ways, and we know their codicological structure. So I could map the Latin text onto pages and bifolia within a single quire to test the methodology. All of the details of these analyses will be laid out in our forthcoming article, but for now I'm going to walk you through just a few of the speculum tests. For our purposes, we're primarily interested in openings. That is, comparing the verso of one leaf on the left of the opening with the recto on the next, on the right of the opening, since those are the sequences that are mutable if the bifolia are reordered, except for the bifolium in the middle, which is both consecutive and joint. But each verso actually has 3 pages to which it is codicologically related. So for one verso, we have its recto, which I am calling the confoliate. I made up that word. And its facing page, so in this case 2 recto, and its conjoint, in this case 12 recto. It's important to note that the confoliate score is immutable. The relationship between the recto and its verso cannot change. That's all consistent. The same goes for the conjoint score. Folio 1 and folio 12 are attached to one another. In the Speculum manuscript, we calculated the similarity scores for the confoliates, here with 1V and 1R, facing pages, so here 1V and 2R, and the conjoints, 12R. Note that the conjoint of folio 1 verso, that is 12 recto, is separated from 1 verso by 10 intervening leaves and several chapters of text. If the method works as intended, the similarity score between 1 verso and its conjoint should be significantly lower than the scores comparing it with its confoliate or facing page. And indeed, that is just what we found. Remember, this is calculated even in the Latin, based entirely on graphic features such as spelling and word context. It has absolutely nothing to do with the meaning of the text. We also anticipated that the conjoint scores should get higher the closer we get to the center of the choir, as the two attached leaves are closer to one another. The central, and that is exactly what happened. The central conjoint pages, folio 6V and 7R, are both consecutive and conjoint, and thus have a significantly higher similarity score than the non-consecutive conjoints. The Aberdeen Bestiary produced similar results. In that respect, then, LSA is indeed a predictor of adjacency. But what happens to the LSA similarity score when the bifolia are misordered? That was the next test. So I've color-coded this so that you can see what's happening. In its current correct sequence, the similarity score average for each consecutive pair in the choir, whether confoliate or facing, is 0.42. So that's our baseline for this choir. As we tested random ordering of the bifolia, we found that the misordered choir's average facing score was significantly lower every time, as in these two examples. These results suggest that LSA might indeed serve to help us reverse engineer the original sequence of bifolia in the Voynich manuscript by working to maximize the similarity scores between facing pages. There's something else to factor into the analysis, though. You cannot change the laws of codicology physics. Go Canada. Jimmy would be here with his elbows up, I'm telling you, if he were still with us. Some combinations are physically impossible. For the advanced codicologists in the room, I'll add that both material and data evidence suggests that none of the Voynich bifolia have been inverted. For the balneological section, the blacked out cells are the physically impossible pairs of versos and facing rectos. Colin ran the numbers, we filled in the chart, and we were off to the races. Here are the current facing scores, the conjoints, and all the other options. But we actually started this analysis with the last choir of the manuscript, the dozen leaves filled with nothing but text and marginal stars, in part because there are no illustrations to add any unconscious bias to my interpretation of the data. So here are the confoliate scores in the first and facing scores in the first half of the choir. The confoliate scores are pretty high, giving us a kind of a baseline. The facing scores are a different story. Several are quite low and below 0.4. That suggests right off the bat that the bifolia in this section might be out of order. One facing score stands out, though. Folio 108 recto compared to its facing page results in a very high score of 0.72. But here's the problem. These conjoint pages are only consecutive because the internal bifolium, folios 109 and 110, is missing. Why should two leaves that weren't necessarily supposed to be consecutive have such an anomalously high similarity score? This question led us to consider all of the conjoint scores. Now remember, what we saw in the speculum manuscript was that the conjoint scores got higher as we moved towards the center of the choir. That was not what we found here. I was stunned by the results, and I made Colin go back and run the numbers a few more times to be absolutely sure. In nearly every case, the conjoint score was significantly higher than the current facing score. Even for 103 and 116, which are separated by 10, formerly 12 leaves. Low facing scores indicate the bifolia might be out of order. Consistently high conjoint scores, Sean's nodding, Sean gets it. Consistently high conjoint scores suggest a resolution, a hypothesis that explains many of the anomalies found in the current manuscript structure. What if the leaves of every bifolium were both conjoint and consecutive? What if Instead of nested bifolia, the manuscript was originally structured as sequential single bifolium quires, not quaternions, not ternions or binnions, but an entire manuscript of sequential singulions. If that sounds crazy, it is, but hear me out. Let's see what the data show in other sections of the manuscript. And can everyone please appreciate the animation? Thank you, thank you. Thank you. I'm very proud of that. All right, in the Paleological section, quire 13, the conjoint scores are a little bit higher than the facing scores, but not dramatically so, and certainly not by as much as in the marginal stars section. The LSA analysis here then isn't as clear-cut, although the advanced Voynichologists in the room and on Zoom will likely be intrigued to learn that our analysis does support the division of quire 13 into two quires, 13A and 13B, as Glenn Caston and Nick Pelling have suggested, but not in the same way they thought. I don't have time to get into that today, so you'll have to wait for our article to be published to find out more. The data are even less indicative in the herbal section. In this section, so here we're looking at quire 7, the scores are negatively impacted by the statistical noise of the language A, language B distinction, seen here when the facing score transitions from scribe 1 to scribe 2. Those low scores were expected. They were not at all a surprise. But even in a transition within language A folios, shown here, the numbers are still really low. So while LSA does not necessarily help us reorder the herbal bifolia, this outcome does support the generally accepted contention that each page is in fact a completely different topic, a different plant without a coherent narrative running from page to page. But the idea of each bifolium serving as a singulion quire does account for the bifolia with drawings and stains that cross the gutter, since the inner pages of any given bifolium would be consecutive as well as conjoint. Examples include this one in the herbal section. We zoom in, you can see the petals cross the gutter. This one, again, we have some leaves that are across the gutter. Here we've got one, this nymph's hand sneaks out on the other side of the gutter, and this one that we've already seen. There's even this example spotted and noted by Nick Pelling, where a splash of red or brown pigment seems to cross the gutter from 10 verso to its conjoint 15 recto. In addition, and perhaps most importantly, this proposed structure resolves the anomaly of mixing scribal bifolia in nested quires. The more we examine the manuscript with the singulion structure in mind, the more evidence we find to support the idea. The cosmological and zodiacal sections, they are already consecutive singulions instead of nested quires. This means that we have now found evidence of singulion structure in the herbal, cosmological, astrological, biological, and marginal stars sections of the manuscript. So what about the last two sections? In spite of its size and complexity, the rose is itself a singulion. The pharmaceutical section is a little bit more complicated. This section is comprised of 6 bifolia, originally 8, in 3 quires, originally 5. 3 of the bifolia are botanical and likely don't belong in this section at all. Quire 17 repeats the problematic mixing of scribal work found elsewhere in the herbal section, a problem that the singulion structure resolves. Quire 15 is a binnion with a pharmaceutical bifolium nested within an herbal, all written by scribe 1. Visually, these 2 bifolia are totally unrelated, suggesting that they too should be separated into, you guessed it, singulions. And the missing quires 16 and 18, guess what? They were singulions too. That means there is evidence of singulion structure in every part of the manuscript. Now, those of you who have spent time studying and analyzing manuscripts and their codicological structure are almost certainly asking yourselves, how can you take a pile of singulions and put them in a binding? It doesn't make any sense structurally. And you're right, it doesn't, and you can't. A Gothic binding structure only works with nested quires. But remember, I'm suggesting that the misbinding took place when the manuscript was bound for the first time. If it was truly intended to be a series of at least 58 stacked bifolia in singulions, they couldn't have been bound. They would have been piled up and secured in a wraparound cover like this one, a modern African version of the medieval analog. In fact, the only analogous manuscripts I have been able to find, intentional sequential singulions rather than bound nested quires, is a group of Qurans in West Africa, Mali and Nigeria to be specific. But let me make this clear, I am absolutely not suggesting that the Voynich manuscript is from Africa. It is not. Just let me put that out there as clearly as I possibly can. But the analog of these Qurans is really instructive. And I put the QR code because this is an absolutely fantastic, really interesting article about manuscript structure in African and other non-European manuscripts. So the prevailing hypothesis about Qurans structured this way is that they were used for teaching. Students could work from single bifolia of 4 consecutive pages, passed out among the class, almost like late medieval Paesia. This idea reinforces what the identification of 5 scribes implied, that this was a communal object, perhaps even pedagogical. If the Voynich manuscript did indeed begin its life as a stack of unbound singulions, at some point early in its history, someone, likely someone who couldn't read the text, must have just decided to organize the bifolia in standard nested quires, sewn and bound between wooden boards, without any understanding of the actual intended sequence of bifolia. It is also worth noting that the edges of the book block are uneven and untrimmed, which may also support the hypothesis that the manuscript was not originally intended to be bound. The logical next question is, can the LSA data help us suggest what the original sequence of singulions might have been? With the test manuscripts, the correct sequence of leaves was the one that provided the highest average similarity score across facing pages. By maximizing the average scores across sequential bifolia, we can propose a potential original sequence of bifolia in the Voynich manuscript. We'll use the marginal stars section as a trial. To conduct the trial, we calculate rather the similarity scores comparing each final verso. So here we're looking at 115 verso and each first recto of the 6 bifolia. 1 bifolium is missing. Okay, so one of the bifolia is missing. You remember folio 109 and 110. So we can't be sure that this is going to generate the correct sequence, but let's see what happens. So the current facing score average is 0.44. Of the 720 possible sequences of 6 bifolia, the highest average score is this sequence, which increases the facing score average from 0.44 to 0.57. Not a huge improvement, but certainly higher. When we look further, I had to do another video once I learned how to do them on generative AI. When we look further, we find physical evidence to support this particular singulion sequence. It retains the originally blank 16 verso as the final page. And at the beginning, I swear I didn't plan this, at the beginning, we get this big fancy letter, the only one in this section of the manuscript. Exactly what you would expect to find at the beginning of a new section. So Colin and I have a lot more work to do. We're currently conducting analytics on reordering, trying to see how we can reorder the herbal section, and investigating how LSA might help linguists dig into the distinctions between language A and language B, or identify pairs of related words that could help us all to read the manuscripts at last. When we publish our results, which are currently in peer review, we will also make the code and data set public in a GitHub repository so that other researchers can both reproduce our results and use the data in their own work. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about the manuscript, I've put some reliable and responsible Voynich research resources on this page. So just splash that with your phone. All right, I'm happy to take questions in the time remaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was extraordinary. Lots of data to assess and to digest, and a wonderful example of how computational analysis can help the qualitative work that we do as manuscript specialists. So just a reminder, we have people online. We also have people who have accessibility issues. So we will pass. I'll do my Phil Donahue impression. So raise your hand, but please don't speak until you get the mic in your hand, okay? Sean?
Okay, I'll start with the softball. And I'm assuming this is a duh. So the recollation of the bifolia in the order you put them, I assume then comports with the scribal identifications. So now it's those are all individual, those bifolia are all by the same scribes in order.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
It makes sense, but I
Yeah,
just wanted
absolutely.
you don't have changing scribes.
Script with maybe 2 exceptions. Every bifolium is written by one scribe. Yeah, exactly.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Sorry if I've misunderstood something, but so in addition to the bifolia being misbound, is it possible that any of them were misfolded? You know, like if you have two.
Right. So when I said inverted, that's what I meant.
Okay.
Yes. So we actually did test what would happen if they were inverted, and all the scores just like drop precipitously if you invert the bifolia. We did test that because there is this theory out there that the biological section with the ladies in the baths should be divided into 2 choirs, and the hypothesis that was put out about this did require 2 of them to be inverted, and we tested that, and the data just do not support inverting any of the bifolia.
Fantastic. Thanks
Yeah,
for
it's a
clarifying.
great question.
Oh, okay, that was convenient. Thank you for a really amazingly interesting and very exciting presentation. And I ask out of curiosity and as someone who's not really doesn't know much about the manuscript. So, given your findings, and given the fact that this is sort of we know that this book was misbound so drastically. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the degree to which this manuscript was actually meant to be a book of any sort originally. I mean, I know that we have the bifolia that go together, we have these sections, but especially if it is pedagogical materials, do you see it as a possibility that maybe this is, I don't know, maybe some kind of alchemical like society, and this is just they have pedagogical materials and this is some sort of selection of them that somehow got like that's possible?
All sorts of things are possible.
Yeah.
You know, once you start thinking of it this way, as this, you know, so originally there were at least 58 bifolia. There are now 52 because 6 bifolia and 2 singletons are missing. There are all sorts of things you could imagine for how this was intended. Was it actually, maybe, you know, maybe the herbal bifolia, maybe the order doesn't matter for that section, right? I mean, maybe they're just plants and they pass them around and people look at them. It's absolutely possible. And I'm not sure we're going to know until we can actually read the thing.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, thank you.
So this may be a question not for you, but for your CS collaborator.
Yes.
But I will just address you since you are in the front. It seems like there's a lot of potential in latent algorithms more generally. I know you've already used one. I know there's a latent topic modeling algorithm that could help, potentially find clusters. I'm just wondering, what latent algorithms are out there? Which ones are you thinking of using? Like what, could you talk a little more about that new direction of research?
So I can't really speak intelligently about it. That's Colin's job. But I would say, so in the article that we've written that is under peer review and hopefully will be published sometime soon, there's a lot more that we dig into. So for example, Colin has looked at how the different illustrative topics, generally speaking, compare to one another, and whether there is in fact reason to tie these various sections together by looking at the larger corpus instead of page by page, things like that. We're looking at word pairs, which is really cool. You can, if you compare every word to every other word, you get an extremely large spreadsheet. But if you just sort it and look at the top 100 or something, you can see some patterns starting to emerge in terms, in thinking about grammar, thinking there are some surprises, like this word and that word look like they don't have anything in common, but maybe it's like car and truck, right? Maybe they're in a similar set of objects. And so I think that the looking at word pairs could be extremely exciting in terms of thinking about the manuscript and also further understanding the relationship between language A and language B.
Okay, thank
But
you.
that's for the linguists and the computer people. I'm just here to interpret.
Thank you so much. Question touches a bit upon the same topic, but like general question would be, how do you think these progresses with the codicological structure might bring any closer to deciphering the text or the actual language? Because was like the paleographic comparison you showed is pretty interesting in terms of like, okay, it doesn't allow to identify hands maybe, but it's like gives a sense, at least to me, seeing it for the first time. It's the writing mentality which is behind that is clearly like similar to that. It's behind Latin alphabet, let's say. So this is a general question, and connected to that, how many? Yeah, you said that. So like in kind of the idea of having just singulions is not very, cannot really point to any environments because we don't have any other examples as far as I've understood. What about trying, like at which point are the studies about trying to match the drawings and the schemes with existing knowledge at some points, at some areas, within that area you showed the manuscript could probably stem from?
Yep.
Thank you.
So there, there are lots of Voynich discussion boards that vary in their reliability and the sort of seriousness of the people posting. But the one that I spend a lot of time on, it's called Voynich Ninja, and there's quite a lot of talk there about this question of trying to match the iconography in the manuscript with known manuscripts. And my friend Cohn, who did that map with the Ghibelline Merlins, has found some really interesting and potentially important analogs. Really, hard to argue with that they're extremely similar. And most of those analogs have been in kind of a Germanic context, which sort of points to a slightly more northern origin. But a lot of, so the thing about working on the Voynich is that it can be poisonous, and most serious scholars have not wanted to come near this manuscript for good reason. But because I sort of work adjacent to traditional academia, I feel like I can do this work. And but there are not a lot of art historians who have done any work on the manuscript, at least recently. And I would love to see some serious art historical work done on this manuscript. I think art historians out there here's a topic for you to really dig in. You know, one of the things I'm really interested in now is trying to determine whether the scribes were also the artists. So is scribe 1 drawing scribe 1 plants, or is scribe 2 drawing scribe 2 plants? It's not clear. And that's, I think, a really interesting, I think that's a really interesting topic. And we need some art historians to get going on this. So if you're an art historian looking for a topic, here you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You mentioned earlier these graphs about word frequency, and I'm sure this is something that has been done, but you didn't really talk long about it. Is there any indication what type of language, what group of language comes closest to this? Is it a Germanic language or a Romance language? I think one should be able to determine that, and I'm sure somebody has tried.
Yes, so Claire Bowen, who I've mentioned several times, and other linguists have done a lot of work on this, on comparing the patterns that we see both at the word level, the spelling, the frequencies, to known medieval versions of known languages. And we really haven't found one yet that aligns quite right. There are some languages that we can exclude. It does not appear to be an Asian language. It does not appear to be an African language. But we just don't know yet. We need more analytics. So I'm hopeful that this new technique will help kind of revisit some of those analyses and help us make some progress.
Lisa, this was amazing. And I offer myself as a neophyte to this. So thank you so much. My question was kind of adjacent to the art history question, but less about what art historians would do in terms of, let's say, finding analogs or locating it, as in the question of the towers, the Swantail towers, and more in terms of decoding the images. I mean, in terms of what. So you're decoding the materiality of the manuscript,
Yep.
and towards some kind of decoding a la Bletchley, of the language. But what about the images? I mean, has there been interesting, reliable, sensible work towards decoding the images? And I do just have to add that I'm having a hard time mapping the making of images onto the Pesha system. I mean, in other words, there's a kind of usefulness to Pesha that doesn't, that images somehow conflicts with. But that's a comment. Thank you.
So it's there is a lot of debate about how to interpret some of these images, especially in the Paleological section, and also the rows. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of interpretations of what's happening in that image. And unfortunately, we just can't know until we can read it. Like we can say this kind of looks like the zodiac in the middle and the naked ladies around the side kind of looks like prognostication. There are 30 of them on each page, 15 on the ones that appear twice, which is why they appear twice. But it's not really a calendar because the numbers don't add up. But there's quite a lot of debate about that, and I'm not sure that we can know until we can read it.
Thank you very much, Lisa. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm the idiot when it comes to codicology, but I'll try to ask a reasonable language question, and that is, have you ever made an alphabetical list of the words?
Oh, yeah.
You have. And can you do anything with the morphology from that? Because you might have the word schnit, and then app followed by ak, and then to see if that can help you identify a verb,
Definitely.
Adjective.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I got to mention Claire again because she's the linguist I work most closely with. She and one of her colleagues, they're doing some work on trying to, like if you look at 3-letter words, it's generally the case that what the pattern is. It's either vowel, consonant, vowel, or consonant, vowel, consonant, right? And so looking at those kind of patterns to try and understand the morphology of the language, try and understand the grammar, there is definitely that kind of work being done. And the thing about listing the words, so much of that is a subjective interpretation of the letters.
Yep.
There's a lot, there are some people who think that, so there's the one that looks like the number 8, but you can write that in several different ways. Sometimes it starts at the bottom and goes around. Sometimes it starts at the top and goes around. Are those the same? Are they different? And, the decisions that you make about that are totally going to impact your analytics, right? And so you have to, if you're doing this kind of work, you have to be really clear about what your assumptions are. And Colin and I have done that in our work. We've laid out very clearly what are the assumptions we're making before we do the work, because it is not, it's very subjective. Sometimes we don't know whether there's a space between, you have 3 letters and a space and 3 letters, but it's a really small space. Is that a word break? Is it a 6-letter word, or is it 2 3-letter words? Right?
That happens in medieval manuscripts.
So true.
Which get separated all the time.
Indeed. And of course, we don't know, there's no punctuation. I didn't mention that. There's no majuscule and minuscule. There aren't enough characters to have capital letters, but there's no punctuation, which is odd. There may be ligatures, there may be abbreviations. There's so much we don't know.
Thanks very much.
I've got some questions from the chat.
Okay, tell me who's asking too.
So this is from Carrie Rappaport.
Okay.
Did you image more pages like Folio 1R you showed? And will those images be made available online?
So far they've only done Folio 1, and I don't know if there are plans to do more. Like I said, the manuscript is very, very, very fragile. And generally speaking, they don't let people handle it. And you can't, for example, you can't open the foldouts anymore because they could tear. They're very, very fragile, but they have a high-end facsimile at the library, which they will hand you instead. And so the XRF was really only of Folio 1. One cool thing that I didn't mention, if I go back, I'm just going to do this until I get back to where I want to be. If you look at the iron map, where you can actually see very clearly the recto and the verso. And you know what? It's easier if I just do it this way. Hold on. Sorry. Let me just go back to where we're going here. There we go. All right, hold on. Let me just jump back so I can show you this, because it's actually really cool. 1 second. Back. So we get to the XRF. There we go. So there. So if we look at this, so here you can see really clearly both the recto and the verso layered on top of one another. And last week, I was at a symposium at the Santa Fe Institute where I got to know an absolutely brilliant mathematician who said that she worked with the conservators who were doing the conservation work on the Ghent altarpiece. And the side panels on the Ghent altarpiece are double-sided. And so when they took X-rays, they got X-rays that look like this, where the 2 images were smushed together. And she has algorithmically figured out how to tease the 2 images apart. And so I'm hoping that I can get her the high resolution images of these so that she can do that. So we'll have the recto as a separate image from the verso. But we'll see if, depending on how, let me put it differently. The library, the curators and the conservators and the lawyers and the insurance people are the ones who decide whether the risk is worth the reward for any kind of testing and imaging. And so I don't know if they will be willing to do more. I just don't know. And the same goes for multispectral. We only have images of 10 pages. And I would love to see the entire manuscript worked up this way. But there's a risk in exposing the manuscript to that handling, the heat, the light. And so it's not up to us. It's up to the library to decide. And for the time being, they really don't want to subject the manuscript to that kind of risk.
Thank you. We have another from Mark Saltveit.
Hi, Mark.
Is it possible that the missing bifolia are not missing, but that the foliator thought something was missing because they grouped them incorrectly?
So skipped the foliation intentionally, you mean? Is that what he means? I guess. It seems unlikely to me. I mean, almost anything is possible, really. You know, I mean, the manuscript could have been sent down from on high yesterday. You know, I mean, that literally almost anything is possible. It's a question of how possible, right? I mean, sure, I guess that's possible, but I think it is exceedingly unlikely.
I'm not sure if Mark would like to clarify, but
No, that's all right. Keep going.
all right. So this next one is from FM. Can you please expand on the micrography of the manuscript?
Oh, so that's probably not a term I should have used. It's not really micrography. It's just written small, which is different. Micrography is really not the right word. But you do have on this page, because it's so, you know, it's very large and it has a lot of writing on it, and the writing is very, very tiny. That's all. It's not hidden. It's not secret. It's not like some secret hidden thing. It's just small writing. Okay, we'll stay there.
Thank you, Lisa. Your findings on the misbinding and the resulting wrong order of the Voynich are really riveting. And I wanted to pick up John's question earlier about the bookness of the Voynich. So now that you have or are on the cusp of sequencing the manuscript correctly, can you say more about scribal stints across the various leaflets, or in fact, ideally across the sections of the Voynich?
So I will come back to this for your question, but let me just go back to the summary, because that will be the easiest way to explain this. If we go back to where we lay out how the scribes and interact, there we go. So all of the cosmology and astrological sections are entirely by scribe 4. The balneological section, entirely scribe 2. The stars section, almost entirely by scribe 3, except for half a page written by scribe 2. In the botanical section, every bifolium, with one exception, is entirely written by the same scribe. So all 4 sides, all 4 pages are scribe 1, all 4 pages are scribe 2. And in terms of putting them back in some kind of order, there's no way really to know, because the data has so much noise in that section. It will be really difficult to do that. But regardless, each of these sections is generally attributable to a single scribe. Does that answer your question? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was fascinating. I've never been introduced to this manuscript before.
Oh, don't Google it. Google with care. That's all I say. Google with care.
But just looking at the sections, what came, and the character of the illuminations, what came to mind to me was Hildegard of Bingen. Has anybody ever talked about?
Oh, sure.
They have.
Oh,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. People are always
so
talking about
naive.
this. Absolutely. And you know what, I mean, when you look at the topics, botany, cosmology, astronomy, balneology, you know, it feels like a scientific compendium of some kind.
Yes, and the other, didn't she have her own language? The
Yeah.
And are there any?
I mean, this is much too late. This is, you know, this is Hildegard, but
I know, but there could be her manuscript. The thing is, people don't realize that readers get influenced by manuscripts that are in libraries. So even though she wrote in the 12th century, that could be, you know, the person who put this together could have been seeing her things and be influenced by a book in a library.
Sure, it's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think anyone has found a direct connection, but people have looked. People have definitely looked. If you Google Voynich and Hildegard, you'll find quite a lot. that has been written of people trying to draw that connection, but no one has found an explicit connection.
What do you think of it?
I don't know. I mean, it would be great, right? It would be totally amazing and cool. I don't see an explicit connection. I think the genre may be related. It's similar. It's not really it's not written in a Christian context. So, this is a very secular manuscript.
With the stars? I mean, the things that come to my mind are the woman of
Right,
Revelation.
but Hildegard is writing in a Christian context,
Yes.
right? I mean, this is so different from that in terms of the different elements that come together. I mean, honestly, don't tell anyone I said this, but what I really, really, really want it to turn out to be is material written by women for women, preserving
Yes.
women's knowledge and knowledge about women's health and herbs and healing. And, that's what I really want it to be. Can I prove it's that? Of course not. But that's in my dreams, in my fan fiction. That's what it is.
Okay. I'd like
In
it too,
that
but
case,
as
there is a connection there. If we're talking about women's knowledge,
Yes.
right, and women's work, there could be a connection.
and then the rose, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I mean, if you go online to the Yale website, this is in fact the web page at Yale that gets the most traffic out of anything on the Yale server.
Okay.
It's the Voynich, and all the images are there, high resolution, and you can open up that rose and just zoom and zoom and zoom and zoom. It's hypnotic, and that certainly does have kind of a scivious feeling to it.
Okay.
Yeah, the rose does for sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Elisa, thanks. That was so fantastic. This follows on from your observation that you see this as a secular manuscript, because I'm very interested in those Ghibelline crenellations. I don't know if people have thought very far about that.
Yeah.
But to do Ghibelline crenellations is quite a statement, because regular crenellations that you see all over Europe are papal.
Mhm.
They're pro-papal, they're Guelph.
Right, and this is it's political. The Ghibelline.
Political and maybe religious and regional, certainly. But it's a statement to put in the Ghibelline crenellation.
Yeah, I agree.
I just think it's an interesting direction.
It means something.
Yeah.
Yes.
At a time when you've got the greatest gathering of sort of linguistic talent, intellectual talent coming together at the Council of Constance 1414.
Oh, I thought you meant right here in this room.
Right here too. Right too. I don't want to sort of join the lunatic fringe, but I think it's so interesting, this coming together extraordinary talent in which for 4 years they had a kind of institute of learning of all kinds involving the emperor to find a new pope. So just those sorts of things in the zeitgeist.
David is about to go down the rabbit hole. I can see it now. Welcome to my world, David.
So I'm not a codicologist or a paleography, and I'm a social historian. And when I had to look at this a while ago, what I was wondering about is, should we, for speculative purposes, pick up the stick at the other end? Like, we're assuming that there's a meaning here, and so we're trying to find the meaning. What if we start from the assumption that it's either meant to be a purely kind of creative exercise, possibly a fraudulent exercise, possibly an effort in early 15th century Italy? There's a lot of money chasing manuscripts. There's a lot of interest in understanding.
Cool stuff.
Yeah, but there's a lot of interest in understanding, what was the language that God spoke to Adam with, and what did the Etruscans do? So we're pursuing meaning as though there's meaning there. But is it possible to look at this as something which is either meant to be not just a joke, but possibly something that's produced to fool some banker into getting rid of a lot of money to buy it, or just as an exercise?
So there are a lot of people who believe that, and there's a lot of digital ink on that exact question. My own feeling is based on the linguistic analytics. I think it would be an unbelievable and extraordinary achievement to put together something that is so consistent in its orthography, in its, with the 5 scribes using Voynich's the same way with these repeated words and spelling, patterns. I feel like it's too regular in some ways to have been invented. But, and the analytics, like the Zipf's law, for example, really do point to it being a language, but we can't prove it either way. So it's of course it's possible that it's just nonsense, and there are people who are right now posting blogs about me in response to what I've said here today, trying to make their own case as to why it is in fact meaningless nonsense. And I'm kind of agnostic about it. I know in my heart what I would love it to be, but I don't really have skin in that game. If it turns out that it's meaningless, I will happily say, wow, oh my gosh, that's an actual incredible achievement. If it turns out to be meaningless, it's a really extraordinary achievement.
Hi. On the foliage, which contains the drawing of a plant that we all recognize.
Yes.
I was thinking, so maybe from the was there any text next to it?
Yeah, this.
Yes. So I wonder if we can maybe decode the text based on the number. I mean the name of the plant that we all recognize, and hopefully.
The plant that shall not be named, you mean cannabis? So that is definitely an angle that has been pursued, not just for this, but for other plants that people think they've recognized, but also, this question of, this cluster of 7 stars, there's a word next to that. And is that, if this is the Pleiades, is that a word that is a name in some language for that constellation? And that is absolutely an angle people have worked on, using, starting with the language and then working to see these labels that seem to be associated with the stars or with the various plants, if they can somehow be, if we can reverse engineer it that way. Definitely, it's a really important strategy.
So has it found anything?
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Not yet. So the whole problem with this manuscript, or there are lots of problems, but one whole problem is that we do not know the source language. Like if we knew that we needed to turn this into Latin, it would have been decoded decades ago. If we knew it was Middle English, if we knew it was, medieval Turkish, it would have been decoded decades ago, because you have your source language, you have your encoding, and you just work the problem. The biggest problem with this is that we have no idea really what the source language is. So I get solutions in my inbox. I translated it, it's English. I translated it, it's Hebrew. I translated it, it's this or that. And you can't do that. That's not good linguistic scholarship. It's not good cryptographic scholarship. The only reason that we could break the Enigma code in World War II is because we knew it was German. Seriously, if we hadn't known what language was being encoded, and that's why they couldn't break our codes, because they were Native American languages, right? And so if you don't know the source code, the source language, it's extremely difficult to decode, for sure.
I'm starting to think they imbibed on that plant and then wrote the language.
Very possible. It's quite possible.
You want to ask a question? Because I was curious. I mean, I probably already know the answer, because in the fact you said the manuscript is so brittle, it's hard. But has anybody done any DNA testing on the vellum to find out whether that helps you with the location?
Well, so the thing so people bring that up a lot. There's a whole call. We need to do DNA testing, and then we will know where it's from. We don't have a data set to compare it to, right? So there's a project right now in England to look at charters of known date and place and start collecting DNA evidence to start creating a database. But 15th century, 16th century England doesn't really help us for thinking about this. We need a database of millions of samples And, you know, it's like working with tree rings, right? I mean, comparing your tree to one tree doesn't get you there. You need all of that data, and we just don't have enough data. Someday we might. Someday there might be a gigantic parchment database with millions and millions of samples of known date and place of origin. And then, yes, absolutely, this will be the first thing that gets tested for sure. I mean, the species is identified. It's the ones that have been tested were all calfskin, but you know, that's not helpful. They had hoped it would be goat. If it had been goat, that would have been awesome, but no luck, no such luck. Then you're like, woo, Italy, we're done. But no luck.
Well, and the other thing is that the vellum market is actually an international market.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, unfortunately, the material testing it's too ordinary. As extraordinary as it is, you know, iron gall ink, standard pigments, standard text, you know, it's all just ordinary, which is too bad. It would be great if we could say, yes, that's parchment from the north slope of this Alp. You know, that'd be great.
the cow was killed on a Tuesday.
Exactly. No such luck.
Well, if that was ordinary, this was not. This was an extraordinary
Thank you so much.
presentation. Thank you for a wonderful Q&A.
Thank you so much. Thank you online. Thank you all so much.